Hey everybody, Z Garcia here, and today I'm taking a look at the latest small expansion to Imperial Settlers. We didn't start the fire. This one. In this expansion, the players are presented with new options for deck building and a new concept to be played with, the idea of Conquests. You are now able to conquer your opponent's faction locations and incorporate them into your own tableau. So you could have the Japanese end up with factions from the barbarians. That sort of thing. So I'm going to show you how it all works. I'm not going to explain the base game, of course, as I never do in the expansion reviews. If you want to check that out, go watch our video for that so you know how the game works. But I'm just going to show you what this changes to the base game and just give you a look at a couple of the cards featured in here. Here we go. In the expansion, you are going to get 10 cards for each of the 4 base factions. You also get 12 common cards to be shuffled into the common cards deck, and you also get 3 used for solitaire play. And so once you've constructed your decks, you are ready to begin with the new rules in play. And those rules are as follow. So let's say our game is a little bit farther along here. The players have built up a couple of cards, and you now have access to a new action, which is Conquest. So you may conquer your opponent's locations, one of their faction locations, and incorporate it into your own kingdom, as opposed to before where you only had access to their common locations and you could just destroy those for a bonus. So to attack and conquer one of my locations, my opponent would have to pay 2 swords for the card in whatever line they're attacking that is farthest from the center board here. So this would take 2 swords. The next one would take 3 swords, and so on. If I, on my turn, build this card, if they want to conquer me now, that one takes 2, this one takes 3, the next one takes 4, and so on. So let's say they in fact do conquer my location, this location here. They are going to pay their 2 swords. They are going to take that card, slide it into the correct line here as close to their own board as possible, and I get 1 worker as recompense. That's it. That's all I get out of that. And then once they've taken that action, it'll be my turn again. They will have access to that card. If it's a production card, it immediately produces for them. If it's a feature, they have access to that feature. If it has a building bonus, by the way, they don't get that again. That already happened when I built the card. And of course, many of the cards that are included in this expansion deal with this idea of conquests and things that happen when you conquer other locations. So for example, I have here a few from the Romans that say the following. And by the way, I do want to mention here before I go any further that some of the English on these is a little bit funny. I'll talk about that a little bit more later on. But it can be a bit distracting. So this one, for example, the tax collector here says, feature, each location you conquested gains feature. Each time you build a common location with the same color, gain a victory point. This one here is a production, the guarded woodshed, and it produces 1 stone, but it also says production 1 or 2 wood for 3 or 6 enemy locations in your empire. So if I've stolen 3 locations, this card not just makes me stone, but also 1 wood. And then there's a new kind of card, which is these, fortifications, fortresses, if you would. So the idea with these is they'll have a cost that you pay, and you are going to put a resource on these to track the level of the building. And you'll just move that along every time you pay that cost, and these generate specific things for you. More of them, the more you build it up. So, for example, action, spend 1 stone to gain 1 victory point and 1 fortification. The first time I do that, I'm going to go ahead and gain my 1 victory point and put this marking level 1 on that building. It also has a feature which says at the end of the round, you're going to get 1 victory point for each fortification on this location. So if I do that, I am going to get 1 victory point now at the end of the round, another one, but if I do it again next turn, I get 1 victory point when I do it, 2 victory points at the end of the round, and so on. Now, these kinds of cards are safe from being conquered, or conquested, as this game would say, but they can be attacked, and the players can spend 2 swords, base 2 swords always, no matter what, to reset this here on the side. Keep your opponent from getting too many victory points. So that's how these work. The common locations are also going to be some variations on these concepts. So let's take a look at a couple of those. This one says, action, spend 1 person, 1 worker, and 1 gold to conquest any common location. This one says, spend 1 sword to choose an enemy. They must give you 1 card from their hand. That's very nice. That doesn't necessarily tie into the conquest, but that's what it does. And then we've got, let's find another one here that is very specifically about that. So this one here, War Council says, each time your location or one of your locations is conquested, again, their words, you may spend 1 worker to gain 1 sword. Very good, great defensive card. Don't mess with me or I'll attack you right back. And so those are the things you can expect to see in the game. As I said, you've also got the Egyptians here with their own fortifications, and you've got new cards that, for example, this one here that says, production, choose 1 enemy location, move it 1 space to the left. Why would you do that? So you can attack it more easily, right? So those are the kinds of things you are going to see. And so that should give you an idea of the kind of things to expect from this small expansion. Lots of confrontation and a brand new action you can take in order to end up with cards from the Romans in your barbarian fortress, in your barbarian empire. So let's go back up top. Let me tell you what I think of it. All right, so there it is. Let's talk about it. I'm going to start with thematic ties. The theme here, the concept of being able to attack your neighboring, societies, if you would, and take over their locations is a neat one. I like the concept. I like the idea of almost mixing and matching, being allowed to take something over that you would not normally be expected to have and having it work with your own thing. So from a thematic point of view, I like it. I think it's well implemented. The aesthetics, component quality, in this case, quality control, that sort of thing. I think, unfortunately, it's very low in this case. The game is riddled with awkward English and riddled with typos as well. There's a lot that got through quality control here, which is very unfortunate. It saddens me to see that so many of the words on the cards are misspelled or don't really make a whole lot of sense. They say the word to conquest, something being conquested quite a bit, when clearly it should have been to conquer and something being conquered. They can call the action the conquest action, but the English should be sensical. So that's too bad. The cards look good otherwise. They just have a lot of mistakes on them. The replayability, does the game scale well, and is there does the expansion scale well, and is it replayable? Are there new things to discover? As I said in the thematic conversation there just a second ago, I think that the interesting part is that you are going to see combos that you haven't thought of before because they were not possible before. This idea of stealing that 1 card that always upsets me when the Egyptian player throws it down, be mine now. This idea of, hey, if you drop that card, I am stealing it. I hate that card. Every time you play it, you start just to destroy me. So if it hits the table, I'm going to pay my swords. I'm going to find a way to have those swords ready to go. And I'm just going to steal it and pull that little piece out of your contraption, out of your concept, That's really neat. And it allows for a lot of different matchups among the players. Especially I like to play 2-player myself. So it's going to allow for a lot of different combinations. That's excellent. It does not, I would say, overwhelm the game. It doesn't suddenly just become about having your factions and you having my factions. At that point, we might as well just trade. But it's fairly easy to steal other players' locations, And that means there's a lot of replayability. The game length, I would say, is about the same as in the original game. I don't think this affects that aspect of it. It just changes other aspects of what's going on at the table. Ease of play. Is the game fiddly? Does this add too many rules to what's going on? I would say they handled the idea of conquering your opponent's locations very smoothly. Wanting to play something that you really, really want to keep and then quickly bury that thing by building other cards right next to it before your opponent is able to build up those swords and attack it. That's neat. That's a cool puzzle, trying to protect a key building. Now, if it shows up late and you have to build it far out from the center, then yes, it's vulnerable. But it's a cool idea, and it's easily implemented. It's not difficult to explain the rules to this. I also very much like those fortification cards. That's a nice idea. There's only a couple of them in the decks, but ramping up or leveling up one of your buildings is something we haven't really seen before, and it works smoothly and in an interesting way. Lastly, the tactics and strategy, luck, that sort of thing. I think this opens up a nice amount of discovery for the game again. The idea of combining things that would not normally be combined. How do you tactically attack that? What do you take? Because it's easy to do, but it's not cheap. You don't just get two swords like that. Certainly not all the factions do. So when do you do it? What do you take from your opponent? Do you just take a building because it's neat? Or do you take a building because it's a key part of their apparent strategy? That's clever, and that presents a lot of opportunities and a lot of tactical choices in the game, which I like very much. So, overall, except for the production issues I have with this, the quality control, that sort of thing, I think the idea here is strong. Now, this is not an expansion I would play with all the time, and in fact, I think of all the expansions that have come out so far, this is the one that most feels like a variant to the game. This is the one that when you want to play a game that's pretty cutthroat, you throw in, we didn't start the fire, and you play with it. Once, couple times, whatever, and then you go back to original game. Even with expansions, that game is going to feel very different than a fire version, play of the game. So I like that it allows you to mix the game up, to change it up. If you are feeling like the original play is getting stale, you want more action, you want a little more confrontation, this gives that to you. If you didn't like those aspects in the original game, believe me, this is not an expansion for you, because that's all it's really about. But if you don't mind the confrontation and you want to spice it up every now and then with something different, this is a good one for that. I'm definitely docking at some points, though, because I just find the whole thing sloppy a little bit, So it still squeaks into a seal of approval from me because it is a strong concept. It's just physically not well executed, and that's too bad. I'm hoping to see the future products and expansions for Imperial Settlers not have these kinds of issues that we find here. And some of them, again, might just be perceived issues for me, but the spelling mistakes are certainly issues. Maybe calling something being conquested, that might be okay for someone if that's what the action is called. I think it sounds very awkward, but spelling issues are spelling issues. And it's just 55 cards, so that's too bad. So again, it does get a seal of approval from me for the strength of the concept and how cool it feels to play with this shuffled in. Give it a shot if you are a fan of the game, as I am, because I think you're gonna be interested in what happens when you shuffle these cards in. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Z Garcia. I'll see you next time.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.